The silence in the VIP wing of St. Jude's Hospital didn't just break. It shattered. The sound of a palm connecting with skin echoed like a gunshot against the sterile marble walls. Ellen Sullivan felt her head snap to the side, the world spinning into a blur of fluorescent lights and clinical white. Her cheek didn't just sting. It burned with a fire that seemed to sear right through her soul. She gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her abdomen, shielding the 7-month-old life growing inside her. Her breath hitched, a jagged, terrified sound that filled the sudden, suffocating vacuum of the hallway. Standing before her was Arthur Sterling, a man whose face graced the cover of every financial magazine from New York to London. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a god in a bespoke 3-piece suit, a man who viewed the world as his personal chessboard. And right now his eyes, cold, slate gray and utterly devoid of humanity, were fixed on Ellen with a terrifying level of disdain. He didn't look like a man who had just committed an assault. He looked like a man who had just swatted a fly. "I told you," Arthur hissed, his voice a low, dangerous vibration that made the hair on Ellen's arms stand up. "My mother does not take generic medication. You will go back to that pharmacy, you will find the brand I demanded, and you will do it before I decide to buy this entire hospital just to fire you personally." Ellen's eyes were brimming with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "Sir, the brand you requested has a contraindication with her heart monitor. It's for her safety." Arthur stepped closer, invading her personal space until she could smell the expensive sandalwood of his cologne, a scent that now smelled like pure malice. He looked down at her swollen belly with a sneer of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do you think I care about your medical opinion, you insignificant little girl? You're a glorified waitress in scrubs. Know your place." Then he did the unthinkable. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of warmth or even of triumph. It was a slow, predatory curving of the lips that signaled he knew exactly how much power he held over her. He reached out, flicking a stray lock of hair from her face with a gesture that felt more violent than the slap itself, and then he simply turned on his heel. He walked away, his polished Oxfords clicking rhythmically against the floor, leaving Ellen trembling in the middle of the corridor, the mark of his fingers beginning to bloom into a dark, angry purple on her pale skin. He had no idea. He truly believed he could walk away from this. He believed that money was a suit of armor that no one could pierce. Hello to all of our incredible viewers tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into this journey of justice and hidden power, I want to give a massive shout out to our global community. Where are you joining us from today? Whether you're in the bustling streets of Lagos, a quiet town in the UK, or somewhere in the heart of the US, we are so glad you're here. How are you all doing today? I hope you're ready for a story that will make your blood boil and your heart race. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep bringing these intense, emotional stories to life. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when Arthur Sterling realizes exactly whose sister he just laid a hand on. As Ellen leaned against the wall, her legs finally giving way, she fumbled for the phone in her pocket. Her fingers were shaking so violently she almost dropped it. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the hospital board. She dialed a number that wasn't saved in her contacts, a number she had promised she would never use unless her life depended on it. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. It was a voice that sounded like shifting gravel, calm but carrying an undercurrent of absolute, lethal authority. "Ellen, why are you calling this line?" "Dominic," she whispered, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path over her bruised cheek. I need you." There was a pause on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like the calm before a hurricane that could level a city. "Who did it?" her brother asked. There was no hello, no what happened. Just the cold, hard realization that someone had broken the one rule that kept the world spinning on its axis. Never touch a Sullivan. Arthur Sterling was currently riding the elevator down to his waiting limousine, adjusting his cuffs and checking his reflection, completely unaware that he had just signed the death warrant for his empire. He thought he had walked away smiling. But as the elevator doors slid shut, the question wasn't if he would pay. It was how much of his world would be left standing when Dominic Sullivan was finished with him. The heavy, reinforced steel doors of a private hangar on the outskirts of the city hummed as they slid open, revealing a man who existed in the shadows of the global economy. Dominic Toretto Corleone didn't just walk. He moved with the deliberate predatory grace of a man who knew exactly where every threat was positioned in a room. He was the shadow behind the throne, a fixer for the world's elite and a ghost to the law. But to Ellen he was simply Dom, the brother who had raised her in the harsh winters of South Boston after their parents were taken by a hit-and-run that the police had been too busy to solve. Dominic stared at his phone, his knuckles white against the blackened titanium casing. He stood 6'4", a wall of muscle and scars hidden beneath a tailored charcoal suit. His deepest fear wasn't death or the loss of his vast clandestine network. It was the failure to protect the only piece of light left in his life. Ellen was his moral compass. She was the nurse who refused his millions, insisting on earning her way by saving lives, while he spent his life deciding who got to keep theirs. "Vince," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. Out of the darkness of the hangar stepped Vince Miller, a man with a jagged scar running across his jaw and eyes that had seen too many war zones. Vince was Dominic's shadow, his enforcer, and the only person who knew the true extent of the Sullivan legacy. "I heard the call, boss," Vince said, his voice tight. "The car is ready. The team is on standby. We tracked the GPS on Ellen's phone to the VIP wing of St. Jude's." "I don't want a team yet," Dominic replied, his eyes burning with a cold, focused fire. "I want a name. I want every bank account, every offshore shell company, every dirty secret and every person he has ever loved. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he whispers in his sleep." Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Ellen sat in the break room, a cold compress pressed to her face. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a woman who had spent her life trying to escape the violence that surrounded her brother. She wanted a quiet life for her unborn daughter, a life where she didn't have to look over her shoulder. Her deepest desire was simple: to be seen as a human being, not a servant to the wealthy or a pawn in her brother's world. Her thoughts were interrupted by Sarah Connor Skywalker, the head nurse and Ellen's closest friend. Sarah walked in, her face pale as she saw the bruising. Oh my God. Was it Sterling?" Sarah whispered, closing the door behind her. "The board is already talking. They're saying it was an unfortunate misunderstanding. They're preparing a non-disclosure agreement for you to sign. They're scared, Ellen. Arthur Sterling owns the land this hospital sits on." Ellen looked at Sarah, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "He thinks he can buy my silence? He thinks a check can fix the fact that he hit a pregnant woman." "He doesn't just think it, he knows it," Sarah said, her voice trembling with empathy. "The man is a monster, Ellen. He destroyed a rival tech firm last month just because the CEO didn't laugh at his joke. Please just take the money and move. You have the baby to think about." Ellen stood up, the compress falling to the floor. The vulnerability that had clouded her eyes moments ago was being replaced by something else, a steel she had inherited from the Boston streets. "No, Sarah. For the first time in my life, I'm glad my brother is who he is. Arthur Sterling didn't just hit a nurse. He declared war on a family he doesn't even know exists." In his penthouse overlooking the city, Arthur Sterling poured himself a glass of 30-year-old scotch. He felt invigorated. The slap had been a release, a reminder of his absolute dominion over the little people. He checked his reflection, adjusted his tie, and smiled at the man in the mirror. He was preparing for the gala of the century, the launch of his new global telecommunications empire. He had no idea that at that very moment Dominic was looking at a digital file titled Sterling, Arthur. Dominic's thumb traced the image of Arthur's smiling face on the screen. "He smiled, Vince," Dominic whispered. "He hit her and then he smiled." "What's the move, boss?" Vince asked. Dominic looked out the window at the city skyline, the lights reflecting in his dark eyes like a coming storm. "I'm not going to kill him. Not yet. I'm going to make him watch as I take every brick of his empire and turn it into dust. I'm going to make him realize that all the money in the world can't buy a second of mercy from me." The air in the hospital break room felt heavy, charged with the ozone of a coming storm. Ellen's hand was still resting on her stomach when the door burst open. It wasn't the hospital administrator with an NDA, and it wasn't her brother. It was a man she had never seen before, tall, wearing an overcoat that cost more than her yearly salary, with eyes that scanned the room like a thermal imager. "Mrs. Sullivan?" the man asked. His voice was melodic but carried a sharp edge. It's Miss Sullivan, Ellen corrected, her voice trembling. Who are you? My name is Bruce Wayne Stark, the man said, stepping into the light. He was Arthur Sterling's primary business rival, the only man with a net worth that could actually rival the Sterling estate. I was in the VIP wing visiting a colleague when I witnessed what happened. I'm also the man who is going to help you burn Arthur Sterling's world to the ground. Ellen stared at him, confused. Why? Why do you care? Because Arthur isn't just arrogant, he's a liability, Bruce said, his eyes softening as they landed on her bruised cheek. And because I have a very particular set of skills when it comes to corporate sabotage. But more importantly, I know who your brother is. I've done business with the Sullivan Network. If I don't help you, Dominic will likely level this entire city block just to get to Sterling, and I'd prefer my investments stay standing. The decision was forced upon Ellen in that moment. She could stay the victim, take the hospital's hush money and try to hide, or she could step into the light and become the catalyst for Arthur's downfall. He hit my baby, Mr. Wayne Stark, Ellen said, her voice finally finding its strength. He didn't just hit me. He struck a child. Then let's give him a reason to stop smiling, Bruce replied. But Arthur Sterling wasn't waiting for a formal invitation to the conflict. He was already moving. Back at Sterling Towers, he barked orders at his head of security. Find out everything about that nurse. I want her gone. Not dead, that's too messy, but I want her nursing license revoked. I want her evicted from her apartment. I want her to realize that one word from me is the end of her life as she knows it. Sir, the security chief hesitated. She has a brother. We're having trouble pulling his full records. There are high-level encryption blocks on his social security number. Arthur laughed, a sharp barking sound. Encryption? It's probably just some two-bit hacker or a criminal with a record he's trying to hide. Double the pressure. I want her broken by midnight. The first major plot twist hit 10 minutes later. Dominic didn't wait for a slow burn. He didn't send a warning letter. He sent a message that Arthur couldn't ignore. In the middle of Arthur's high-stakes board meeting, every screen in the Sterling boardroom went black. Then a single image appeared, a high-resolution photo of Ellen's bruised face, taken just moments after the slap. Underneath it, in blood-red text, were 3 words: "Smile for me." Suddenly, the power in the entire building cut out. The backup generators failed to kick in. Thousands of employees were plunged into darkness. In the silence, the sound of a single phone ringing on the conference table felt like a physical blow. Arthur, his face pale with rage, grabbed the phone. Who is this? The man who is going to teach you the value of a smile, Dominic's voice whispered through the line. Check your personal bank account, Arthur. Arthur scrambled to open his private app on his secure tablet. The balance, which had been $4.2 billion seconds ago, now read $0. The billionaire felt his heart hammer against his ribs. His breath became shallow. For the first time in his adult life, Arthur Sterling felt a cold, oily slick of genuine fear. He looked at his board of directors, men who had worshipped him an hour ago, and saw them looking at him like he was a plague carrier. What did you do? Arthur screamed into the phone. Who are you? I'm the brother of the woman you called a waitress in scrubs, Dominic replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. And I'm just getting started. By the time I'm done, you won't even be able to afford the generic medication you were so disgusted by. Ellen, watching from a secure monitor Bruce had provided, felt a shiver go down her spine. The war had officially begun. The inciting incident hadn't just launched a conflict. It had ignited a firestorm that was already leaping across the city, threatening to consume everyone in its path. The billionaire's money is gone in a heartbeat and the hunt has begun. Arthur is realizing that a nurse's brother is his worst nightmare. How are you liking the pace so far? Drop a comment below and let us know if you think Dominic should show any mercy. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting to the good stuff. The penthouse of Sterling Towers, once a sanctuary of glass and gold, now felt like a cage. Arthur paced the floor, his face flushed a frantic shade of crimson. How is this possible? He screamed at his CISO, who was sweating through a $5,000 suit. Sir, it's not just a hack, the technician stammered, his fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. It's a complete digital erasure. Our servers aren't just down, they've been wiped. It's as if Sterling Telecommunications never existed on the grid. And the money, it wasn't stolen. It was moved through 14,000 different offshore relays in 3 seconds. Gone, Arthur. All of it. While Arthur's world began to crumble, a different kind of tension was brewing in a secure penthouse on the north side of the city. Ellen sat on a plush velvet sofa, her hands still resting protectively over her belly. Beside her, Bruce Wayne Stark poured a glass of sparkling water, his movements fluid and calm. "You're safe here, Ellen," Bruce said, his voice a low, reassuring hum. "My security team is the best in the world. Even your brother's people can't get through these walls without an invitation." Ellen looked at him, noting the way the light caught the silver at his temples. There was an undeniable spark between them, an attraction born of shared trauma and a mutual enemy. Bruce wasn't just helping her out of spite for Arthur. He was drawn to her quiet resilience. During the long hours of the evening, they spoke not of money or power, but of the things that mattered. He told her about the parents he lost. She told her about the dreams she had for her child. "Why are you really doing this, Bruce?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. Bruce paused, looking out at the city he helped build. "Because men like Arthur think they can treat the world like a playground. I've spent my life fighting monsters, Ellen. Sometimes I forget what it's like to protect something beautiful." But the romance was a fragile blossom in a field of thorns. The obstacles were mounting. Arthur, desperate and cornered, wasn't going down without a fight. He used his last remaining asset, a private, untraceable security firm made up of ex-special forces. He didn't care about the money anymore, he wanted blood. "Find her," Arthur ordered his lead mercenary, a man known only as Snake Plissken Vane. "I don't care who her brother is. I want her back in my hands. She's the only leverage I have left." Meanwhile, Dominic was moving through the city's underworld like a reaper. He visited the docks, the warehouses, and the backroom gambling dens. Everywhere he went, he left a trail of broken alliances. He was cutting off Arthur's supply lines, ensuring that no one, not the banks, not the politicians, and certainly not the police, would lift a finger to help the falling billionaire. Vince approached Dominic in the back of a rain-slicked SUV. "Boss, we have a problem. Arthur's gone off the grid. He's hired Plissken Vane's crew. They're tracking Ellen's biometric signature through the hospital's database." Dominic's jaw tightened. "They won't find her at the hospital. But they'll find the person closest to her." The tension spiked when Sarah, the head nurse, was intercepted on her way home. Plissken Vane's men didn't use words. They used a black van and a blindfold. They sent a video to Ellen's phone, a red herring designed to lure her out of Bruce's protection. The video showed Sarah tied to a chair in a dark basement, with a digital clock counting down from 60 minutes. "If you want your friend to live," the voice on the recording distorted, "come to the old shipyard. Alone. No brother. No billionaire. Just you." Ellen stood up, her face pale but her eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. She looked at Bruce, then at the phone. She knew it was a trap. She knew Arthur was waiting. But she also knew she couldn't let Sarah die for her. "I have to go," Ellen said. "It's a suicide mission, Ellen," Bruce countered, stepping in front of the door. "That's exactly what he wants." "He thinks I'm weak because I'm a nurse," Ellen said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "He thinks I'm vulnerable because I'm pregnant. But he's about to learn that there is nothing more dangerous than a mother protecting her own." As the rain began to pour over the city, the pieces were moving into place for a confrontation that would change everything. The attraction between Bruce and Ellen had deepened into a fierce bond of trust, but the frustration of being hunted was pushing them to the brink. Character growth wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a survival mechanism. The old shipyard was a skeletal graveyard of rusted cranes and hollowed-out shipping containers. Rain lashed against the metal, creating a rhythmic, deafening drumbeat that masked the sound of Ellen's footsteps. She walked into the center of Warehouse 7, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm here," she shouted, her voice echoing through the vast, dark space. "Let her go, Arthur." From the shadows, a spotlight flickered to life, blinding her. Arthur Sterling stepped into the beam, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes glowing with a manic, flickering light. He wasn't the polished god of finance anymore. He was a man who had lost everything and found a dark, twisted liberation in his own ruin. He held a heavy revolver in his right hand, the metal glinting coldly. "You Arthur spat, the word dripping with venom. One little slap. One insignificant girl. Look what you've done to me. My boards have deserted me. My accounts are empty. I am a ghost in my own city. You did this to yourself, Arthur, Ellen said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. You chose to hit a woman who was only trying to save your mother's life. You chose to be a monster. Arthur laughed, a high, jagged sound. A monster? No, my dear. I'm a businessman. And in business, when you lose an asset, you liquidate the opposition. But before I end this, I want you to know the truth. You think your brother is some hero? You think Dominic Sullivan is the one who took my money? Ellen blinked, a cold dread settling in her gut. What are you talking about? The money didn't go to some offshore Sullivan account, Arthur sneered, stepping closer. My CTO finally traced the final encryption key before he fled the country. The person who systematically dismantled my empire wasn't a fixer from South Boston. It was your savior, Bruce Wayne Stark. Ellen felt the world tilt. No. Bruce is helping me. He's protecting me. He's using you. Arthur screamed. He's been trying to take over Sterling Telecommunications for a decade. He needed a reason to bypass the Federal Trade Commissions. He needed a scandal so toxic that the board would beg him to buy the shares for pennies. You were the perfect excuse, Ellen. He didn't find you by accident at the hospital. He's been tracking your brother's movements for months, waiting for a spark to light the fuse. The revelation felt like a physical blow, sharper and deeper than the slap that had started it all. Everything she believed about her recent sanctuary was challenged. Had the shared vulnerability, the late-night talks, and the growing attraction all been a calculated performance by Bruce? Suddenly, a second figure emerged from the darkness of the rafters. It wasn't Bruce. It was Vince, Dominic's enforcer. He landed silently on the concrete floor, his suppressed pistol aimed directly at Arthur's chest. The girl doesn't need to hear your lies, Sterling, Vince said, his voice cold. Lies. Arthur countered, holding up a tablet he had been clutching. Check the timestamps, enforcer. Bruce Wayne Stark initiated the short sell on my stock 40 minutes before I even stepped into that hospital. He knew I was on edge. He knew exactly what would happen. Vince hesitated, his eyes flickering to Ellen. The stakes had reached their highest point yet. It wasn't just a war between a billionaire and a brother anymore. It was a web of betrayal that threatened to consume the innocent life Ellen was trying to protect. In that moment of shared vulnerability and shattering truth, the warehouse doors were blown off their hinges. A fleet of black SUVs roared inside, headlights blinding everyone. Dominic Sullivan stepped out of the lead vehicle, but he wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at the man stepping out of the car beside him. Bruce Wayne Stark. Dom. Ellen whispered, her voice breaking. Dominic walked toward her, his face a mask of stone. He stopped 10 feet away and turned to Bruce. He's right about one thing, isn't he? You were moving on his assets before the first drop of blood hit the floor. Bruce looked at Ellen, his expression unreadable, a mix of guilt and cold calculation. I did what was necessary to ensure he could never hurt you again, Ellen. If I didn't own him, he would always be a threat. You used my sister as a corporate strategy? Dominic's voice was a low, lethal growl. The tension in the room was a physical weight. Ellen stood between the brother she feared, the billionaire who hated her, and the man she thought she was falling for, all of them driven by power while she only wanted peace. The romantic connection she felt for Bruce was now stained with the bitter ash of betrayal. The air in the warehouse turned glacial as the truth settled like a shroud. Ellen looked from Bruce to Dominic, then back to the broken, laughing Arthur Sterling. She felt a sudden, sharp pang in her abdomen, not the flutter of a kick but the tight, agonizing knot of stress and physical exhaustion. She gasped, doubling over, her hand clutching her stomach. Ellen! Bruce and Dominic shouted in unison, both taking a step forward. Stay back, she cried out, her voice raw. Both of you, you're all the same. You play with lives like they're entries on a ledger. But the moment of internal drama was brutally cut short. Arthur Sterling, seeing his empire truly lost and his rival Bruce exposed, decided that if he couldn't have his world, no one would have theirs. He didn't aim at Dominic or Bruce. He aimed at the supports of the massive rusted crane looming over the center of the warehouse. Bang! Bang! The shots rang out, sparking against the ancient, stressed bolts. With a groan of tortured metal that sounded like a dying beast, the overhead structure began to buckle. "Get out. Now!" Vince screamed, diving toward Sarah, who was still tied to the chair. But it was too late for a clean escape. A massive section of the corrugated roof and steel girders collapsed, creating a wall of debris that slammed down between Ellen and her protectors. Dust and pulverized concrete filled the air, turning the warehouse into a gray tomb. When the dust settled, the separation was total. Dominic and Bruce were trapped on the other side of a mountain of twisted iron. Ellen was alone in the dark with a manic Arthur Sterling and the sound of his ragged, terrifying breathing. "Now," Arthur whispered, crawling out from under a fallen beam, his face smeared with grease and blood. "It's just us, little nurse. No brothers. No billionaires. Just the girl who cost me $4 billion. Ellen backed away, her heart hammering. Her phone had been crushed in the fall. She was trapped in the dark, her body aching, her pregnancy making every movement a struggle. She felt an insurmountable wave of hopelessness. She had tried to be good, to work hard, to stay away from her brother's violence. And yet here she was, facing her deepest fear, being powerless against a man who enjoyed causing pain. On the other side of the rubble, Dominic was a man possessed. He threw his entire weight against a steel beam, his roar of frustration echoing through the warehouse. "Ellen. Ellen, answer me." Bruce was frantically clearing smaller debris, his expensive suit shredded, his hands bleeding. For the first time, the calculated strategy was gone. He wasn't thinking about telecommunications or market shares. He was looking at the debris and realizing that his ambition had put the only woman who made him feel human into the hands of a psychopath. "I have to get to her," Bruce gasped, his voice breaking. "Dom, the fuel lines. The crash severed the heater lines. This place is going to fill with gas." Indeed, the sharp, pungent scent of natural gas began to hiss from the ruptured pipes in the floor. A single spark would level the entire shipyard. Inside the dark pocket of the warehouse, Arthur cornered Ellen against a shipping container. He raised the revolver, his hand shaking with a mix of adrenaline and madness. "You destroyed everything, Ellen. But I'm going to make sure you're the first one to burn." Ellen looked at the gun, then at Arthur's eyes. She felt the despair threatening to swallow her whole. She was separated from her love, her brother, and her safety. The situation appeared utterly hopeless. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for her baby as Arthur's finger tightened on the trigger. The hiss of the escaping gas was a death knell, a constant reminder that time had run out. But as Arthur Sterling's finger tightened on the trigger, something shifted deep within Ellen Sullivan. The despair that had threatened to drown her was suddenly replaced by a cold, white-hot clarity. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a woman who had survived the Boston winters, a woman who had built a life out of nothing, and a mother who would not let her child's story end in a gutter. "Do it, Arthur," Ellen whispered, her voice no longer trembling. It was as sharp as a scalpel. "Pull the trigger. The spark from that gun will ignite the gas. We'll both go up in flames. But I'll die protecting my daughter. You'll die for a bank account that already says zero." Arthur froze. The logic of a dying man is a fragile thing, and Ellen had just shattered his. In that moment of hesitation, she saw her opening. She didn't wait. She reached out, swinging her heavy medical bag with every ounce of her remaining strength, catching Arthur squarely across his wounded face. On the other side of the rubble, Dominic and Bruce heard the strike. They stopped fighting the debris and started fighting together. "The structural beam," Bruce shouted, pointing to a pivot point near the crane's base. "If we both pull, we can shift the center of gravity just enough to create a gap." The two men, the ruthless fixer and the calculating billionaire, finally found common ground in their desperation. They gripped a rusted iron lever together, their muscles straining, their faces drenched in sweat and rain. It was a moment of true realization. Power meant nothing if they lost the woman who gave their lives meaning. With a roar of effort, the debris groaned and shifted. A small, jagged opening appeared. "Ellen!" Dominic screamed. Through the gap, Ellen saw the light of their flashlights. But she didn't just run for it. She reached back into the darkness, grabbing the bound and terrified Sarah, dragging her toward the light. "I've got her," Ellen cried out. As they scrambled through the opening, Bruce reached out, his hand locking with Ellen's. The contact was electric. A silent exchange of forgiveness and a deeper understanding. He pulled her through just as the first flicker of a spark from a dying electrical wire hit the gas-heavy air. "Run," Dominic commanded. They burst through the warehouse doors just as a muffled humph echoed behind them. The windows of the shipyard shattered, and a column of fire roared into the night sky, lighting up the rain like 1,000 suns. Standing in the mud of the shipyard, Ellen took a deep breath of the cold Boston air. She was covered in soot, her cheek was bruised, and her body was exhausted, but she was standing. She looked at Dominic, whose eyes were filled with a fierce, protective pride. She looked at Bruce, whose regret was written in every line of his face. "Arthur didn't make it out," Vince reported, stepping out of the shadows. "The explosion took the West Wing. It's over, boss." The central conflict wasn't just about surviving the fire. It was about the fire that had been lit inside Ellen. She had found her inner strength. She wasn't a pawn anymore. "We need to go," Dominic said, his hand on her shoulder. "My doctors are waiting. We're going to make sure you and the baby are perfect." Ellen nodded, but she turned back to Bruce. The key to the final resolution wasn't just about escape. It was about justice. "Bruce," she said, her voice firm. "You wanted to own his company. Now you do. But you're going to use those billions to build a new pediatric wing at St. Jude's. And it's going to be free for every mother who can't afford it." Bruce looked at her, a genuine, humble smile touching his lips for the first time. "Consider it done, Ellen." The final confrontation was set. The monster was gone, but the world they lived in needed to be rebuilt. Hope had returned, fueled by love and a courage that money could never buy. The night didn't end with the fire at the shipyard. For Dominic Sullivan, a fire only stopped when there was nothing left but ash. While the paramedics checked Ellen's vitals in the back of a luxury ambulance, Dominic turned to Bruce and Vince. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the atmosphere was electric with the finality of what was about to happen. "The physical threat is gone," Dominic said, his voice a low vibration of authority. "But the corruption that allowed Sterling to hit my sister and walk away smiling is still breathing. I want the board. I want the administrators who tried to silence her. I want the world to see what happens when the elite forget their humanity." Bruce stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the flickering orange glow of the dying fire. "I have the ledger, Dominic. I've spent the last 3 hours decompressing the files Arthur tried to burn. It's all here. The bribes to the hospital board, the offshore accounts used to threaten staff, and the list of every official Arthur had in his pocket." This was the climax, not of bullets but of total crushing justice. As the sun began to peek over the Boston skyline, a coordinated strike hit the city's power players. Because of the digital evidence Bruce and Dominic unearthed, the police, the honest ones who had been waiting for a break, moved in. The hospital administrator who had tried to force the NDA on Ellen was led out in handcuffs in front of a dozen news cameras. In the Sterling Towers boardroom, the remaining directors were met not by Arthur, but by Dominic Sullivan and Bruce Wayne Stark. "The company is under new management," Bruce announced, tossing a thick stack of legal documents onto the mahogany table. "The Sullivan-Stark Foundation now holds 51% of the voting shares. Effective immediately, this company's primary focus is the Ellen Sullivan Maternal Health Initiative. And as for the rest of you, your resignations are on the table. Sign them, or we turn over the second half of the ledger to the district attorney." They signed. One by one, the men who had looked down on a nurse in scrubs crumbled. But the true emotional payoff happened back at the hospital, in the very hallway where the slap had occurred. Ellen walked through the doors not as a victim, but as the woman who now essentially oversaw the facility's future. She stood in the exact spot where Arthur had humiliated her. She felt the phantom sting on her cheek, but it was replaced by a sense of profound triumph. Sarah was there waiting, having been cleared by the doctors. The two women embraced, a silent testament to a friendship that had survived a war. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "No," Ellen said, looking at her brother and Bruce standing at the end of the hall. "We changed the rules." The most surprising twist came when Dominic approached his sister. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a diamond or a key to a new car. It was our parents' old brass compass, the one that had been lost the night they died. "I found the man who drove the car that night, Ellen," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was on Sterling's payroll for 20 years. Arthur didn't just hit you. his family has been a shadow over ours since the beginning. Taking his empire wasn't just about the slap. It was about finishing the story our parents started. The revelation was the final piece of the puzzle. The victory wasn't just a response to a single moment of arrogance. It was the redemption of a family legacy that had been suppressed for decades. Ellen looked at the compass, then at her brother. The hero wasn't just the man with the gun or the man with the money. It was the family that refused to stay down. 6 months later, the golden light of a Boston autumn bathed the grounds of the newly inaugurated Sullivan Stark Maternal Center. The building, a marvel of glass and compassion, stood as a living testament to a moment of pain that had been transformed into a legacy of healing. Ellen Sullivan stood on the terrace, the cool breeze catching her hair. In her arms she held a sleeping 3-month-old girl, Clara Josephine, named after the mother who had left them with nothing but a brass compass and a fighting spirit. Ellen looked down at her daughter's peaceful face and felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of money could ever provide. She was no longer just a nurse or a sister. She was a woman who had redefined her own destiny. The door behind her creaked open and Bruce Wayne Stark stepped out, shedding his suit jacket. He didn't look like the ruthless billionaire who had calculated market shares in the middle of a kidnapping. He looked like a man who had finally found a reason to stop counting. "The board meeting is over," Bruce said, leaning against the railing beside her. "The free clinic in South Boston officially opened its doors an hour ago. We already have a line around the block." Ellen smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Bruce. For everything." Bruce reached out, his hand gently covering hers on the railing. The tension of the past had softened into a deep, earned intimacy. "I spent my life trying to buy the world to keep it safe, Ellen. You taught me that you have to be in the world to actually save it." The romantic subplot didn't end with a grand, cinematic gesture, but with something far more satisfying. A quiet, mutual respect and a promise of a new beginning. They weren't rushing into a fairy tale. They were building a foundation. From the garden below, a low whistle echoed. Dominic Sullivan stood there, leaning against his classic black Charger, watching them with a rare, relaxed smile. Beside him, Vince was loading the last of the celebratory gear into the trunk. Dominic caught Ellen's eye and gave a sharp, single nod of approval. The Sullivan legacy was no longer written in the blood of the underworld. It was written in the lives of the women and children walking through the doors of the center. "Dom's waiting," Ellen said, laughing softly as her brother checked his watch with faux impatience. "He's taking us to that Italian place in the North End. He says Clara needs to learn the smell of real garlic early." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Bruce replied, tucking a stray lock of hair behind Ellen's ear. A gesture that, this time, was filled with nothing but tenderness. As they walked inside, the camera panned back, showing the bustling hospital, the happy families, and the name Sullivan etched in stone above the entrance. All the loose ends were tied. The arrogance of one man had attempted to crush a woman he deemed insignificant, but in doing so he had ignited a fire that cleared the way for a better world. Arthur Sterling was a footnote in history. Ellen Sullivan was the future. And so, our story ends where it truly began, not with a slap but with the strength to stand back up. Thank you all so much for joining us on this emotional journey. Seeing justice served and love win is why we tell these stories. If you felt the triumph today, please leave a comment with the word redeemed and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that they are never powerless. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more 40-minute deep dives into the lives of those who turn their darkest hours into their greatest victories. From our team to you, stay strong, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.